Hello, let's talk about what I need you to do this week for lab. So we're going to calculate relative humidity and dew point using the numbers generated from a sling psychrometer. So relative humidity and dew point are both both measures of how much moisture is in the air. So we just need to go through that, and it's a pretty simple process if you use your reference tables. So let's go through how that works and make sure it actually is a simple process here. So finding dew point and relative humidity. So just to make sure you remember the terms here, a device used to measure the moisture in the air is a hygrometer, pardon me. And a sling psychrometer is a specific type of one. So a sling psychrometer has two thermometers on it. They can look slightly different, but it has two thermometers, and one's going to be wet and one's going to be dry. So you can see in the picture here, we have something to hang on to with a scale on it for reading it. We're going to use the reference tables. We're not going to have to worry about the scales on these. But there is a dry thermometer, and there's a thermometer with a little cotton sock on it that you put a few drops of water on to keep it damp. And you're going to spin that around, or you would if you were in person. It gets spun around, and the dry one, it just reads the air temperature. It's the dry bulb. The wet one, because you're making it go through the air, you're causing a wind artificially, evaporation causes it to cool down. First thing to remember is when you're doing these, the wet bulb temperature is always equal to or usually lower than the dry bulb. So you will never, ever, 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 ever have the wet bulb be warmer than. That's just not going to happen. So usually the wet bulb is lower than the dry bulb. So dry bulb is dry, wet bulb is wet. Science is hard sometimes. So the dry bulb just tells you the air temperature. The wet bulb tells you how much evaporation, or gives you an indication of how much evaporation is going on. So someone has gone through and figured out what this all means. Bless them, they've done the hard work for us, so we just have to use a chart now. So it's cooled by evaporation. As a result, it is going to be cooler than the dry bulb, and the bigger the difference between the readings, that's going to mean that the air is drier. If the two numbers are really close, that means the air is pretty wet or completely full. And if they're far apart, it means that it's drier. The simplest version of it. Now we want to know exact numbers for how wet or how dry. So dew point and relative humidity are going to be those numbers. We're going to take the dry bulb reading and the wet bulb reading, and we're going to subtract them. That's going to be a key thing. You do have to be able to subtract, or if you can't subtract, get a calculator. Make sure you don't mess this up. And we're going to use the charts on page 12 in the reference table. So you're going to need your copy of the reference tables out when you're doing this. Pretty sure the ones that are up on the screen here aren't going to be big enough for you to easily manipulate. I will post a copy of it as well if you don't happen to have yours, but ideally paper is the way to go probably. So here's the charts on page 12. We've actually sort of looked at them a little bit in lab before, just briefly. Didn't really understand what they were all about, but we did have them on a worksheet. So we have our dew point temperature on top and our relative humidity on the bottom. Now it just looks like a bunch of numbers at first glance. We have to look at what the axes are. We have the dry bulb temperature down the left-hand side on both charts, and we have the difference between the wet and the dry bulb on top. That is key. If you're gonna make a mistake, if you follow the rules everybody else has in the past, usually the mistake comes by not finding the difference. So key point here, remember this. The top is the difference. You have to subtract the wet bulb and the dry bulb temperatures from each other. That is key. If you do that, this is easy peasy lemon squeezy. All right, so for instance, and this is the first question on the worksheet that you're going to be doing, so this is pertinent. So you have a dry bulb temperature of 10 degrees Celsius, let's say, and the wet bulb is 6. So they're a little bit apart. They're not super on top of each other, but they're pretty close still. All right, so dry bulb is 10, wet bulb is 6. That means we need the difference, so we may as well just subtract them right off before we even get to the chart. 10 take away 6 is 4. You can use your fingers for that one if you have to. That's not always true. All right, so we go to 10 on the dry bulb temperature scale. So there it is, a little shaded on there. So 10 on that scale. Our answer is going to be somewhere there. Now the difference is 4. So we go to 4 on top here. And where the two doth meet, that's going to be our answer. So this first one, the top chart, we have a value of 1. So that means the dew point temperature, the temperature the air would be saturated at, is 1 degree Celsius if the air were to cool down that much. So the dew point, 1 degree Celsius. We can write that on our paper. Well, cami it onto our digital copy of the paper. The bottom chart is relative humidity, the percentage of fullness of the air. Works the exact same way, dry bulb and difference between wet bulb. It's just the numbers in the matrix are different. So now we're going to find a different answer using the same starting point. So the dry bulb temperature is still 10. The wet bulb temperature is still 6. The difference is still 4. Nothing changed. And so we go to 10 going across. There's our dry bulb temperature. Our answer is somewhere on there. The difference is 4. So we go up here, and where they meet each other, that's going to be, in this case, our relative humidity. So 54%. So that's what you're going to do for the attached 2 pages. One of them is just numbers and you give me the answer. The other one has some word problems. So you do have to read these carefully. They're not always worded the same way. I had some issues with people who just look for number, and do it. And there's at least a handful of them there that you have to work backwards. So they might give you that the dry bulb temperature is 10 and tell you that the relative humidity is 54%. And then you have to work it backwards to figure out what the dew point temperature is. If that was the case, if we were given those two numbers, we knew the dry bulb was 10 and the relative humidity was 54, we could say, all right, we're right there on the chart. That means the difference is 4. And you could go to the same spot on the top chart and you could figure it out in reverse. Those require a little more thought, not going to lie, but that's sort of the point. It's not always just number, brainless at the enter. So keep that in mind. So those 2 sheets are what you're going to do and turn in. If you have any questions, shoot me a comment for sure. And good luck.